listening today. Thank you.
No problem. I could help. Bye. Good. Morning.
No, I know. Hi guys. How are you?
Doing well, yourself?
Grab some over there on the table. You'll want it.
Over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I already I want that.
How are you?
With a chainsaw. Join you? Yeah. Jen Haven's gonna join us. No, sorry, no, stay away. Literally have like pockets. Are you $4. I asked them to clean out my whole closet. You know what I mean? Just paper plates and stuff that I found. Yeah, well, you probably got those in bonus. I don't know. I was like, sweet. You know what I mean? You know, so I was like, yeah, see, that's how much. Yeah. Stocking Easter or something. Yeah. I love driving by your house. Yeah. Are you serious? I've seen you do a. I don't know. Oh my God. But you're gonna love this. You know my work, right? Without my controversy, I have it. So I said, oh my God, it's right here. I mean, I got to I get the flag. So that one. Outside. That's just not reality. Everything else that you potentially make have rash judgment, the fear of rash judgment. I think it's always been a fear of being participating in moral sin. I'm not getting away because I can still. Right. Oh, I. Yeah, that's what I'm going to talk about. But I'm just like, these are things I got off in 1995. Next to the chronic phase, it's like filter. I have a hard time on that one.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to my friends in the back. We're about to get started. Thank you, and welcome back, guys. We're glad to see you. For those of you that do not know me, my name is Jennifer Tyndall, and I'm here to begin our conversation on mentor logs. If you did not come through this door, you may have missed the handouts. So I would ask that you sneak around and go grab your handouts if you don't have them, or share with someone at your table. So we are going to get started and talk about what virtual learning looks like in a pandemic and what your role is as a teacher. Because you will have a role and responsibility that some of you are not familiar with. How many of you in this room have been or are a mentor teacher? Raise your hand. Great. Yesterday we had our elementary teachers here. Not a hand went up, except for Michelle Pfeiffer. So if you are a current mentor teacher, it is important that you also pay attention today because there are changes. And we're going to go over those. Why are we doing this? That's where we're going to begin. So we're going to move to the next tile where it talks about what you need to know. So to give you a history of what has happened, we're all well aware that COVID-19 started on March 13th, and it rocked all of our worlds. During that time, school closed, but we kept students engaged. What happened during that time was, quite honestly, a gift that we were able to do and finish the year the way we were. Now, the rules have adjusted as we move into the current phase of phase 4. The governor's roadmap, if you've taken a look at it, speaks to schools can open face-to-face. And that's where we were. And it also speaks of in that roadmap, if schools go into phase 3, no face-to-face. So the purpose for today is twofold. We're addressing how we're delivering virtual instruction for when a district decides in phase 4 to go virtual, like we did last Friday, or in the event the switch flips and the whole state is in phase 3. These pieces of information that I'm going to share with you are critical because at any point, as we've all experienced, the switch could flip and we could go into a phase 3 complete virtual in January, in March. And these mentor logs play a huge component. So what is virtual learning? For those of you that did not raise your hand and have not taught virtually, whether it's in Google Classroom or in a canned program such as Pearson or Calvert or Little Lincoln on the LV side. So we have 3 components of what defines virtual learning out of the Pupil Accounting Manual. And many of you know me, I'm very rule-driven as a special education director. The Michigan Pupil Accounting Manual has guidance to districts on if you want to offer virtual, here are the rules that you must abide by. If you don't, you will not receive payment. So that's the connection there. So in your Google Classrooms that you are gearing up for, you're delivering academic instruction in those courses, meaning you as the teacher. It's a method of two-way interaction that we're going to talk about today that you will have with your students over the course of time that you're delivering virtual instruction. So let's move to the next tile. In the Pupil Accounting Manual, specifically section 50D, it's called virtual learning. They define teacher of record and mentor. How many of you recall a few weeks ago, the governor was going to be on TV, I think it was a Friday, because the legislators were going to be meeting on a Saturday. How many of you remember that news? Some of you heard that. Because the legislators were gathering together to make some rule changes and adjustments. And because of that, House bills went forward and the governor signed some things that modified our world of virtual learning. And one of those is the mentor definition for this school year. So let me talk to you about how we currently structure our teacher of record. The teacher of record is responsible for providing instruction. Goes on to explain the grading, giving feedback in the manual. That comes right out of there. A teacher of record by the manual is defined as grade level certified. So pause, grade level certified. If I am a science teacher at 612, could I be a teacher of record? Yes. If I am a PE teacher, am I grade level certified because I may have a K-12 certification? Yes. If I am a special education teacher with a K-12 cert, am I a teacher of record? Yes. If I am a school psychologist, am I a teacher of record? No. The manual has this reference to mentor, and a mentor is a professional employee of the district. That's where perhaps a school psychologist could come into play. But remember I said that Saturday session where the powers that be got together at the state level? For the 2021 school year, they will not allow that mentor, that professional employee, to operate in a teacher of record capacity or a mentor capacity. So if you are a teacher certified in your grade level, as I just went through the yes, no test, you are doing a mentor log this school year when we are either in virtual learning or we are in phase 3. And remember that switch example? It could flip on a Thursday night. We've been in face-to-face, let's say, the whole month of November, and a cold December day, COVID fires back up. And we go into phase 3. So just process that for a second. Let's go to the next tile. Next tile, we're gonna come back to that one. That's Leslie. So as you process what I've just said, what you need to understand, and again, that special education teacher in me, very goal-driven, is in the event school districts in Michigan enter into phase 1 through 3, or offer virtual learning, and you see that offer virtual learning is bolded, that's what we're doing starting September 8th for 3 weeks. For students in K-12 that are getting 2 or more virtual classes, that's the current state we're in, the district must provide a teacher of record. Now I have to cross off and mentor because that can't happen as of that latest governor package, to document the two-way interaction that occurs between the teacher of record and the pupil in order to collect funding. So, as you're thinking about this, write down questions on the back of your paper as you're processing this, and we'll take questions at the end as you start to process, what did Jennifer just say? Let's go to the next tile. Here's a change. So those of you that raised your hand, and those of you that said, yep, I've been a mentor teacher, yep, I do mentor logs, I know what I'm doing. Here's the change. That Saturday session with those legislators and the House bills that came out that Governor Whitmer signed undid 50D from the Pupil Accounting Manual, and they increased some things on school districts. Everyone walked away thinking, oh, it's less. No, it's a little bit more. And the little bit more is the monthly mentor logs. So, as we put the pieces of this puzzle together, what I am telling you is that at minimum, in the month of September, you are a teacher of record, and you are going to submit a mentor log to your building principal that documents your two-way interaction with the students you are assigned. And we attempted our very best to give a date window of when you would make that contact, and we aligned it to the paydays, because everyone likes to know their paydays these days, right? So from September 8th through 9/23, September 23rd, you must have two-way interaction, either face-to-face, via text, via email, via phone call with the student, and document it. And we're going to give you some examples. And those of you that are mentors, you know what those logs look like. You're very familiar. That piece hasn't changed. This has changed. So the other connection that you need to make is you're sitting there thinking, okay, Jen just said I'm going to have to do this in September. We'll be back face-to-face October 5th. God forbid, the governor puts us in phase 3 in December. What does that mean? We're doing logs again. So we can go in and out and transition through this all year long. So for the month of September, I will repeat that. You're documenting at least one two-way interaction with your students you're assigned between September 8th and September 23rd. You'll get an example in a few minutes. You're going to turn that into your building administrator on or before September 30th. Your building administrator will have to read and review each one of the logs. And as they are deemed compliant, they'll pass them on to Rochelle, because Rochelle will have to then give them to our auditor to review. And if any of them, so we try to clean them up before we get them to the auditor. If there's any question about them, we'll kick them back to you and have conversation to maybe make some edits or changes. Because we want them to be clean and ready to go so that they can be processed and we can get our funding. Okay, next tile. So, we spoke about this new additional requirement of those monthly logs. This tile represents the normal day-to-day business of being a mentor or a teacher of record doing logs. So in this scenario, this is the count window. We're all familiar with count day. Under normal circumstances, this was all we used to have to do, is submit. If you were a mentor teacher, so Kathy McKee was a mentor teacher to kids in Lapeer Virtual, she would submit her logs for 4 weeks, the count week and the 3 weeks following, for her two-way interaction. So our legislators said this was not enough. We want them once a month as well, because you could go in and out the whole school year. So if,
Can you please say that that's October 13th?
Yes.
Is the final day?
yeah, so thank you.
Don't have any paperwork.
Small little typo, special ed director again. October 14th through October 20th, that 14 should be changed to a 13. Oh, the top, that one too. Sorry, let me say that again. October 7th through October 14th, that should be 13.
It's on the paper.
Oh, it's correct in the, see, I do have it together.
It's on the week.
I do have it together. Not all of them. Some of them, you know, COVID. Okay. Okay, so in October, we have our count day. Under normal circumstances, we would submit logs for those 4 weeks. But we now have to submit every month that we're in virtual and the count windows. So I hear some rumblings. So that's a big chunk to process. If we could come back together. If we return to face-to-face on October 5th, the only people that will have to worry about this are our Lapeer virtual kids and their teacher of records. If you are back face-to-face, you can press the pause button, put it away, and wait and hope that we never go back into a virtual format for our face-to-face kids. So your takeaway right now is, at least September, I'm doing a log. If we return back to face-to-face, great. But if I am a Lapeer virtual teacher, I also have to continue this business as well, and those monthly logs. Next tile. The next tile just represents, in the event, it's February, what does spring count look like? Because we count our kids twice. There's a fall and spring, and those two are the big money collectors. Our end of year collection is a different collection of components. But again, we would have a 4-week window if we were in February. Again, if I'm a Lapeer virtual teacher, these dates matter to me, and as those mentor teachers, follow-up training will occur. So we're just giving you kind of an eye-opening awareness of what's occurring. Next tile. So we're going to shift. So everything that I have shared with you is relative to virtual learning, pupil accounting, 50D. Back to those legislators that one Saturday in their House bills. They also said to districts, you need to ensure your instruction. You need to be able to demonstrate that you are giving your students 180 days of instruction in 1098 hours, even though we're less days and hours this year, right? It's removed that. But they still want proof that you're getting the whole kit and caboodle. So districts are putting in district policies, procedures, and requirements on the attendance piece. So Michelle's going to talk to you guys as to what does attendance look like when we are in a virtual mode. So we'll come back to those logs in a minute. Michelle's going to talk to you some more.
So we learned this from you, your experience in the spring. We valued the attendance. Your parents wanted to know if Johnny was on Zoom when he was supposed to be. So students participating in Zoom, you're going to report them in PowerSchool. And the purpose is to communicate with parents and our own data collection to try to track down these students, because we know not all of them are going to be able to be on Zoom. I've got numerous phone calls and emails right now that how am I going to do this schedule? So we know that we can't hold them necessarily accountable, but we're going to do our best to try to take attendance and to try to track those guys down. And right now we had the K-12 meeting just the other day at 5 o'clock, trying to figure out how do we open our building. So your principals are going to work with you. We want kids in the building. We're in phase 4, we can have kids in the building. So I don't know if it's going to be a block schedule. If kids need help in math, this is the time. We'll have support staff. You can invite kids in if you want to meet with them. Right now we're working with the band, and they're going to try to bring in kids on Tuesday to do band outside, social distancing. So we're in the process of doing that. So this will put you in a mind at ease. So for many of you that already do the mentor logs, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I have to do all of my kids. No, what we're going to work on is for 612, the information from mentor logs will be obtained during your second hour Zoom on an individual basis. So if your teacher, your second hour are going to be the ones that you're going to be doing mentor logs on. So everyone's going to have a schedule, and you'll work through that with your building principals. You know that means phone call, text, or email. Special ed students will be mentored by the special ed teacher. And remember, it's only on the core subject areas. So the mentor logs have to be on core. So that's why it's going to be a scheduling process that you're going to go with your administrator to figure that out. And for those teachers that teach guided academics, all the other MTSS requirements you'll have to do in addition to that. So that's all. There's going to be a lot of work that we have to do next week to get this all installed.
Okay, so let's process that. I hear you guys kind of doing some processing at your tables. So we can come back together. So Michelle shared with you the attendance component. She shared with you the attendance component, and she shared with you how you will be assigned. So you're not carrying with you 100 mentor logs. You're only being assigned to your second hour, and you will get further direction from your building administrator, because we know there may be some kids we got to catch because they're going somewhere else, maybe an ed tech scenario or something that we might have to kind of plug holes with. So your building administrator will give you the further direction you need to know who you're filling the logs out with. Yes, you heard special education teachers. You will be mentoring your students. So that means your caseload of 23 kids or whatever you may have assigned, those are your logs to do. So those are peeling out of your gen ed second hour pocket of people. Again, further direction on who, what kid am I responsible for will come from your building administrator. So with that, I want you to grab the next packet that had the calendar on it. And I'm going to shift your minds again. And the purpose of this handout represents those two components. Component one is, how do I fill out a mentor log? How do I do it right? We want to do it right. So we're going to talk about that today, and we're going to talk about how one log is unacceptable and why. And we're also going to talk about that 4-week of fall count in the event we're not back on October 5th and we push into October doing virtual. We have to have now 4 weeks of count logs in October. I'm really hoping face-to-face on October 5th, so we just have to worry about September, right? But in the event, things beyond our control. So I'm going to introduce to you Leslie Shamo. She works for Lapeer County ISD, and her role is to audit school districts in Lapeer County on enrollment, on attendance, on pupil accounting. You may have met her. She may have interviewed you once. And she's the one that eventually your work on logs will go to. And you're going to hear her say, once they hit her desk, they're frozen in time. There's no going back. And we in Lapeer pride ourselves, 7 years of doing Lapeer virtual, on making our logs pristine, clean, and concise so we can get our full funding. Because it all circles around back to us, right? So with that, I'll let Leslie talk. You've got your handout in front of you. And remember, jot those questions down. We'll debrief on questions at the end.
Good morning. So before I get started on this, I want to make sure that you understand the attendance component is one thing. What I'm going to talk about is the 4 weeks of count. So there are very specific requirements for the 4 weeks of count versus what you are doing and what is allowed for the attendance piece. And I want to make sure that you understand the difference. So when Michelle talked about the attendance piece, you're taking that in 4 core. For pupil accounting purposes, for the log, for the count, it can be in any subject area that the student is scheduled in. So that's the difference between the two, and I want to make sure that you understand that before we go any further. The handout that you got has a colored sheet on the top. What this demonstrates are what the count period is, or what the weeks for the count period are. So for count, we go Wednesday to Tuesday. So the 7th through the 13th is week 1. That means you have to initiate a conversation with the student, and the student has to respond to you. The student could initiate, and you can respond. That will count as well. But it must occur between the 7th and the 13th, the initiation and the response. So if the student, you write to a student, say, Johnny, how are you doing in Algebra 1? He doesn't respond until October 14th. That's a deduct right from the get-go. You don't have a week 1 communication. This is what is tied to your funding, your per pupil funding. So these 4 weeks are critical. So you're going to talk to Johnny in each of these 4 weeks, beginning on a Wednesday, ending on a Tuesday. And you're going to document that on the Metro Log. The other page are the correct dates. Just kidding. For count, for each of the count periods. Some of you will still have virtual kids. Even if you go back face-to-face, there's still some virtual students here in Lapeer at the virtual school. And these will still have to be done for those students. The next page is what's called an unacceptable metrology. And I give this to you so you have an example of what I do not want to see and what will cause a deduct. And then that means I have to call Mr. Weinberg and say, really sorry, but I'm gonna deduct $8,000 from you for this kid. I don't wanna do that. I don't like to do that. And you guys have done a fabulous job. Absolutely fabulous job in the last couple of years as far as the mentor contacts go. So when you look through this unacceptable log and you look down through, emailed student, he is falling behind. He said he's aware, but he's really busy. Okay, every contact has to be content related. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. It has to be content related. Again, a class that is on their current schedule. I have seen it where the student was scheduled in Algebra A in semester 1, and the teacher talked about Algebra B. That's deduct. So you have to be aware of what that student is scheduled in and that it is matching what they're scheduled to. I don't care what class it is. I don't care if you only talk about one class in all 4 of those weeks. I don't care if you talk about 4 different classes, but it has to be content related. On the next page, actually the next 2 pages, the second one with the check marks is more for elementary level to kind of show what a good log is. The second one is an acceptable mentor log at the top. If you look, student finished chapter 1 in chemistry, moving on to chapter 2. Perfect. I'm not looking for a book from you guys. Just a documentation that says you talked to that student and what you talked to them about. Hey, John, you're falling behind. You should be at 30%. You're at 10%. What can we do? Let the student respond to you. Hey, we talked about progress. So you and the student talked about the progress in their class. They're at 30%. They should be at 40%. Something along those lines. But again, what class? Talk to Johnny about progress in his algebra class. He's at 30%. He should be at 40% at this point in time. Johnny came in and took an Algebra 1 test. We discussed results. Again, not a book. Simple statements about what you discussed with that student. For you all, in 6 through 12, the communication must be between you and the student. The parent cannot be involved. You cannot write that I talked to the parent. It's not acceptable. Anything indicating a conversation with the parent will result in a deduct. And again, a deduct, $8,000. I don't want to do that. So you have a room full of teachers that have served as mentors. They're great role models, great people to tag if you have a question. You have Doug and Shad, phenomenal on understanding what goes into a mentor log and what's acceptable. If you have questions, start there. Don't let it come to me. I don't want to make a deduct. This is too much at stake for this. These guys will do a great job of coaching you through what you need to do. And I would rather you have the questions and ask the questions and get it right before it comes to my desk. Because as Jen said, once it comes to me, it's done. And I can't make changes. It's a record. The other thing I want to remind you of is that you're communicating via face-to-face, via phone, via Google Meet, text message. Some of you I know do that. If it is a face-to-face or a phone call, that can't be substantiated in any way. So what you write on that log is it. Where if I have a question about the log, a date is wrong, or the conversation just isn't documented quite right, I may say, hey, can I have a copy of that email? And I'll contact Rochelle, and she'll contact one of you, and she'll say, I need an email. You said you did this via email. Can you send the email to me? Let's lay as a question. I'll look at it, and I'll say, yep, that's fine, and then I'll check it off and move on. So if you are communicating via text, via chat, via email, save that off somewhere, just in case I need to see it. I don't want it unless I request it. Any questions? Oh, you guys are good. I'm impressed.
Leslie,
Yeah.
I mentioned core on my slide.
Mhm.
Mentor log will represent core subjects only. Can the log represent Spanish class?
Yes, any class the student is scheduled in. So again, Michelle referenced core for the attendance piece.
No, I mentioned it for mentor, so that slide is wrong.
Yeah, but you were talking about attendance, I thought.
Yeah, in Zoom, they're all gonna take attendance in their Zoom. They all will have attendance, but that slide right there.
It just says,
Oh, then yeah, that is incorrect. It can be any class the student is scheduled in. Math, PE, Spanish, business, accounting, it doesn't matter. Yes.
So, like, you put class, have the ability to like make comments, like private comments about, their assignment and comment back.
It will, yes. So the question was, if you're in the Google Classroom, you're doing a chat, and you have a private conversation with a student, will that count? Yes, it would, you're just gonna document it on the log. So that's your documentation. That would be something I would print off too, or save off in a CSV, so that you have it as proof of the conversation if it's wrong on the log.
Do you want that as other?
I'm sorry?
If we use the classroom comment for questioning, do you want that as other, or do you want that as email?
It can be other. Yeah, it's fine. I'm not really, what I use those check boxes for is to determine whether or not there's proof.
Right.
So, yes.
Notice the question, if you keep that noise all down, let's just be able to hear them and come back as well.
So like if we do a one-on-one Zoom with a student, that would be face-to-face then?
It could be, yeah, it could be Zoom or it could be, or face-to-face or other, either way. I saw a question in the very back.
Waz, you had a question?
I can ask about a digital version of the
Jennifer said that is coming.
It will be distributed.
And I was asked this by a group over here, and I just want to confirm with you. If in Zoom, I do a breakout room, have a conversation, do I record that as other method, or is it face-to-face?
Either way. Again, what I use the check boxes for is to know whether or not I can come back to you for documentation. Generally, if it's face-to-face, I'm gonna just say, no, I can't do anything, it's a DDOT. So if you check the other and you make a note that it was a Zoom chat, then I'll know, hey, I might be able to get something from you guys. That's the purpose of that. I still generally, if I have a question, contact Rochelle and let her contact you all to say, hey, is there any documentation to support this conversation because the log is wrong?
And just to clarify for everyone, it's any class on the student's schedule. And what I told the high school staff yesterday is, I'm gonna anticipate most of you, if you're mentoring your second hour kids, you'll probably talk to them about your second hour class you have with them. You know what's on their schedule. It does not limit you to only that second hour class, but that is acceptable, and that's that line there that we've got a typo. It's not just the core class, it's any class on their schedule.
And then one other thing too, is so some of you have like one of these activities, in addition, you get scheduled for, those will be still your responsibility, in addition to that.
Okay, hold on, I got a question here.
So, on Zoom, you have the ability to chat with students, and it could be like everyone in private. It has to be private with that student, correct?
That's, yes, kind of the same. So I'm glad you asked that question, because another question I get is, can I send out a mass email? Yes, you could send it out, but that's more work for you if you do, because you not only have to, you send that mass email out, the student replies, you then have to reply back to that student again to show that you had a two-way with that particular student. So the mass emails really aren't the way to go unless you want a little bit more work. There's a question over here.
Okay, so I just want to clarify, if it's not October, February, March, we're doing it once, during the month.
Correct.
But if in those 2 months, we do it 4 times.
That's a district decision, and that will turn to Michelle for that answer. But yes, The 4 weeks are imperative during count. Those are required in count. So the answer, there's one attendance requirement per month, and then I don't know what the district is asking of you all for that, but for count, yes. I thought there was a question back here somewhere.
There is the question is, if you have a student who's in the cognitively impaired program, or a student with autism who is nonverbal, and you might need to interact with the parent. I know that you said you can't, but if a student with a disability that is not able to completely communicate without some facilitation, how would you like that addressed?
I actually brought this up to MDE when I had a call with them on Tuesday. They are willing to allow the caregiver/parent to participate in a communication if the child is special ed and nonverbal. So that is a little bit of a help. That's not been allowed prior, so I'm very happy about that. So yes. Yes.
This is my case, like, for example, in the Google Classroom, I just need to make sure that they're commenting like on the assignment, because in the document, you can dismiss the comment and then your comment will go away to itself.
Okay, so say that again. I'm gonna give you the microphone and say that to everybody because you're.
Just with teaching English, if you write it on their document, their assignment, that you're discussing something, they can dismiss those comments. So I would recommend, commenting on the actual assignment and not within the document, or else that will go away, the record of that will, once the student, so it has to be separate of this in the document.
Thank you. Any other questions as far as the mental logs, what's right, what's wrong, how to talk, what you need to do? Yes.
Can it be handwritten or do they have to be typed?
I'm getting really good at deciphering y'all's handwriting, I'm telling you. I don't care, that's a district decision. I will take handwritten, it is fine. Yes.
One thing that I use
Can you guys?
in discussing things like progress, one thing that I do is I will have a copy of saying what their progress is, what their grade is, and then you both sign it. And then send it to you.
And actually, that's a great thing for documentation purposes, because I think that I have used that to return account. So that's one, if the student is there and they can sign off on their progress, or you're sending something to them via email and they can sign off on that, and you have like a little progress report where you're discussing that, keep that for documentation. That's a great tool. There's a question over here.
Yeah, how many entries do you need to make in order to establish that contact? Like, do I have to document every single time I have a two-way interaction?
No.
Okay.
So the question was, do I have to document every time I have a two-way interaction? The answer is no. However, I'm going to caution you on one thing, that if you only document the one time you talk to the student and you document it wrong, that's a deduct. So if there's a couple of times that you've talked to the student, and actually that has occurred in the past, where the teacher will talk to the student maybe twice in a week, and the first communication wasn't valid, and the second communication was actually content related, and you got the count. So a password reset for a math class, for a math test, for a science test, that counts as a communication. Student says to you, I can't get into my science test, or I need you to unlock my science 1 test. I unlocked your science 1 test, there's your communication. Doug.
And guys, I talked about this with the high school yesterday. In the past, when we had our onesie twosies and stuff, and she talked, Leslie, their favorite word, deduct, okay?
It is not my favorite word.
Hey, so, when she, in the past, when there's been a deduct, okay, it's been like 1/6 of the schedule. So it's been like a 0.17 deduct. But with our model, it's saying that we're doing 1 log for each kid instead of doing 6 logs for each kid. That deduct is now a full FTE. So it's very important that we're accurate with these, because losing a 6 is not great. Losing a full is a lot worse.
You guys do a great job. Keep it up and good luck with your school year.
So, thank you, Leslie. I just want to summarize. As you walk out this door, you can expect more direction and follow-up from your building administrators. So they're going to be poking, saying, here's the log. There was the September window, because you will be assigned your second hour kids. You're going to turn that log into Doug or to Jeff or to Wyatt by the 30th of September. If we return to face-to-face and you are just a face-to-face teacher, you can set this aside and wait for that switch to flip on and off to phase 3 or not. If you are a peer virtual teacher and you have kids you're mentoring for 1 class or 2 classes virtually, you're doing them every month and you're doing those count windows. If any of this was not clear, please talk to your building administrator, Rochelle, myself, Michelle, for clarity. Have a wonderful rest of your PD day. Well, we're gonna take a 5-minute break, but first, Dr. Timothy Shanahan is in the house, and we're gonna have some normalcy today. So go ahead and take a 5-minute break and come on.
But they prefer like physical documentation. So they always prefer to write these Tuesdays and not do phone calls. Right. So when I checked the phone, they were like, oh, this is a text. Right. Right. Yeah, and I took a screenshot of that. Yes, I did. Yeah. It's always what's next. So if you do face to face, I have to sign. Sign and date it if it's face to face. It's just like I would have to come into my class that was mentoring, and I'd be like, hey, can you talk about this in your progress? No, I have on one of these things. I keep taking it off and then I stick it somewhere. I want it. It's gone. That land. So this is just like I bought them online. No, I bought them online. It was like a couple bucks. Yeah. Well, when I told you it doesn't very good. That's fine. Working on it. Your little guy's getting big. How old is he now?
I gotta let them know at daycare.
Do you love the like baby stage or do you look forward to the next stage?
I would like him right
Sure. Like I enjoy that part, but I always look forward to what can I do next? What will I be like next?
He's learned a lot.
I say all the time, I know I'm very confident and I'm able to function on their own.
I'm not feeling like a sense
I always like,
for the
I don't have to carry my house out with me, my cars, well, my cars don't work. But I have sports bags now, but before it was like, yeah, there's so many changes in clothes, just in case, and all this, like, I'm not a person who functions. Just leave it in my car and I got it. Yeah.
I'll send it. That's it.
That's so good. I don't even remember that. I'm sure I was like that with my first one, but you start adding more and then eventually you're like, that's not important. They got socks. We're good. They have socks. Yes. Not that I didn't try, but I think after trying certain things I just but I also became things just can't be. And other skills. What awesome. Yeah. It's crazy. But she was so excited that she liked it. Oh, good. So, because they do such a good job. Made it fun. They were running around the house, some scavenger hunt. She made it fun for them. She really liked that. And then she doesn't have to get up so early to go to school. She has to get up at my time. They get dropped off at 6. So she was not looking forward to going back to school. I mean, she does like the face-to-face, but she was looking forward to it. Right. His brother was online. He's doing the virtual. Oh, okay. And she's like, I want to do that. I'm like, you cannot do virtual. Of course they don't like it. But he's so independent, I'm not. The only thing I would have to do is help him with stuff and stuff. But in general, he'll do his thing and reach out to his friends. I told you I refused to let you have it. I know. Do it.
Please take a seat.
He's a smart ass. Now Aubrey's a smart. In the classroom, not at home, but in the classroom.
We're ready. Let's go.
She likes writing.
One more important thing about September 8th that we forgot to mention that you're going to want to hear.
I tried to get it. I just didn't want to.
September 8th, the week of September 8th. Come on, guys.
It's true.
Thank you. The week of September 8th is considered virtual. Even though you're going to have kids face-to-face, one day it's only a portion of those students. So that's why next week is extremely important to get your lesson plans for the week pushed out before you leave for the week. Because that next week is technically virtual, even though you're going to have some students in front of you. Doug also mentioned it's a really good time to do your two-way mentor blocks while they're face-to-face with you for the entire month of September. So you might want to consider ways to do that. So to the rest of the day, let's try to think a little bit about our profession as we remember it. Last year, we received, the state put out the 612 essential document. And we met with department chairs throughout the year. And Kieran Allman went to a conference in Oakland and was part of this group. And really learned and brought back to the district that really the core piece of this essential documents is on disciplinary literacy. So several of us went to conference and to see Timothy Shanahan, and it's one of those conferences you hit once a year that you have to bring back to the district, and all of us that went agreed, and so Timothy Shanahan is here to talk to us about disciplinary literacy, because no matter what platform you're on, we still have to push out best practices, and today I think it will really benefit you. We've come a long way, and Timothy is here for you, specifically 612. We had him here present for K-5 as well, because we know it's important for K-5 to know what they have to get prepared for you. And that mindset, and I've been here 25 years, and I remember the iConnect days when we talked about pushing out those worksheets, and we got to get all the kids reading, and I wish I would have known what I know now to help you, and today I hope that you benefit from that. Timothy Shanahan is a professor at Illinois, Chicago. He's worldwide known for his research, literacy skills. He worked on with President Bush Council, Obama, part of the Common Core, developed the Common Core. So he's a wealth of knowledge. And so let's put on our what we know true to be education and have some normalcy today and learn today. Welcome.
Top of the morning to you folks. It's good to be back in Michigan. I'm a Detroit kid, so this isn't exactly the right part of the state for that, but I taught in Swartz Creek, so that's kind of the neighborhood, right? So yeah, it's not too far away. I drove past there coming in from the airport, in fact. Today is going to be a little unusual because the masks. When I'm up here, I'm going to try to do without it. I like to see your faces, and I like to get. I was a first grade teacher, and I learned a long time ago not to trust the kids in the back of the room, and I still don't. So I intend to get back there, guys, but I'll put my mask on when I come back. I don't like this. It's not the political stuff that people, at the health side, I'm 100% on it. But as a teacher, I like to see your faces. I like to see your reactions. I want to know when I'm boring you. I want to know when people are confused and not raising their hand and saying, hey, would you explain that? A worse experience in this regard, several years ago, I was doing some of this in Bahrain. And they had a number of people in the audience. They had full veils. I mean, you couldn't see their eyes. They could have been in there eating pizza or whatever, you wouldn't know. And I found that very hard. Today's sermon is on disciplinary literacy. And I'm gonna just venture a guess right now from my work around the country in different secondary schools, middle schools, and high schools, lots of places. I'm gonna bet that a lot of you don't know very much about this topic. Some of you might think you do, and we're gonna, maybe you do, but my hunch is you don't, or that you might have some confusions about it. My major goal today is really to develop this concept for you, because in fact, in your standards, the state really requires that you teach disciplinary literacy in the secondary schools. And I know because I drafted the first version of those standards. standards. That's the reason why there are disciplinary literacy standards is because I spoke up and said, hey, do you know what the research is telling us that kids need? And so we're going to get into those kinds of issues. If anybody finds that they want the slides, they're on my website, Shanahan on Literacy. I always post all that stuff up there. And so if you want to find it, go to Shanahan on Literacy, go to publications, and then there's a place to click. There are 3 kinds of publications. There are written publications, there are audio, visual kinds of stuff, and there are PowerPoints. And obviously, in this case, you'd want the PowerPoint. There are also some articles in the written part that might be of use to you. I want to start, I'm pleased that at the seating arrangement here, I didn't quite know what I was going to have, and so I stuck this slide in yesterday because I didn't really know what I was going to be dealing with. Some places that I've been to in person in the last couple months, people are at such a distance trying to do any kind of discussion or exchange at a table or something. Just isn't going to happen. But you guys are able to talk to each other a little bit here. And so I just have a few questions that I'd like your table to talk about for just a little bit. Just want to get some ideas on the table. I'm curious what you think content area reading is or content area literacy. I'm curious what you think disciplinary literacy is. And I'm curious how you think your school district is actually addressing either of those. Content area literacy, disciplinary literacy, and just have I'll give you a few minutes. Please have at it.
Yeah, I think we're all independent of that. I think some collaborate together depending on how they match up personality-wise. And if they keep the same exact content, they might match up a little bit more, but in general, I think everyone makes it. Well, I felt like, okay. I feel like it didn't work out.
Let me pull you back. That was actually wonderful to hear that. Quite animated. I like that. Good morning. Let me pull you back. Okay. One of the things that I think a lot of people end up surprised about is that content area literacy and disciplinary literacy are really different concepts, that they're different things. My wife and I, and I'll talk about Cindy a bit today because she has in some ways a better story about all of this, how she comes to this than I do, so I steal hers. But the fact is, we've had people send us like book manuscripts. We've written this wonderful book, and we'd love it if you would, endorse it because it's all based on your work. And we'll look at it, and it's all about content area reading, and missing entirely what we've been talking about, what the research is showing, and so on. And so, those are kind of embarrassing situations. A lot of people have started using disciplinary literacy as just a new term for content area reading. It's the hip term, guys. It's if you're in, you don't say content area reading, you say disciplinary literacy. The problem with that is they are really different things. And the one that's in your standards is disciplinary literacy, not content area reading. And so while I'm mainly going to talk about disciplinary literacy today, I am going to at times dip into some comparisons with content area reading, because in this state, to become a teacher, secondary teacher, you have to have a content area reading class. A lot of you have had that kind of training. I wouldn't be surprised if the professional libraries, either your personal ones or in the district, have some content area reading textbooks, and those are fine. I'm not knocking those. But we've got to make sure that you understand what it is that you're actually being asked to do, or how can you possibly do it. It's pretty straightforward. So let me start with the one that I think most people know, content area reading or content area literacy. This is a very old idea we found. Basically, the idea here is every teacher needs to be a teacher of reading, right? That's been the byword of that movement for about 100 years now. So, certainly long before any of us came into education. Cindy and I actually went hunting for this term. Where does this come from? This is like a Mark Twain quote that you can never quite put in Mark Twain's mouth. We tracked it back. We managed to get back to like 1923 or 1924 was the oldest citation to it we could find. And unfortunately, that one said something along the lines of, as has long been discussed, every teacher needs to be a teacher of reading. And so, and there was no citation, so there wasn't any trail we could go farther than. So we know it was thought of as an old idea in 1923. That should tell you something. I don't like the idea of every teacher a teacher of reading. I think it's kind of insulting. I mean, can you imagine going to the university and working your tail off for 4 years trying to, you want to be an algebra teacher, you want to be part of the math group, that's the folks that you identify with, and you get to the school district and they say, well, we want you to be a reading teacher. But that's not the club I wanted to join, right? That's not what I've been preparing for. And so it's essentially, it seems to me that the notion, if you go back, the notion has been really quite simple. And it's surprising. I kind of thought we grew into this, but even 100 years ago, I think the notion was boys and girls in 6 years of schooling, which wasn't uncommon then, or 8 years of schooling, frankly, aren't going to get enough reading development to be able to fully participate in American society. That's certainly true in 2021, but apparently it was true in 1921 as well. And so the idea was, could we get the content teachers in their history classes and literature classes and science classes and so on, could we get them to do the same kinds of exercises that we do in the reading classes using your textbooks, so that you could teach these kids to be better readers, and then the notion was everybody would win. And over time, that kind of morphed a bit into, we'll teach you some study skills, we'll teach your kids how to, figure out tests and stuff like that. And, that's sort of, where this all comes from. The focus has been very much on making students better students by building up their reading comprehension and study skills using the content textbooks instead of McGuffey's readers or whatever was being used at the time. The approach pretty much emphasizes teaching English language arts in all of your classes. And after 100 years of experience with this, I think we can tell you it's not been terribly successful. It's not been terribly successful, despite research, it's not been terribly successful at raising kids' achievement. And it's certainly not been terribly successful in convincing teachers to do this stuff. It's the only part of reading that I'm aware of that has a whole literature devoted to teacher resistance. Think about that. Well, you know, we're trying to teach these math teachers how to teach reading, and they don't want to do it. I can't understand why not. And so there's been this pushback. I told the group yesterday, I was doing a workshop on disciplinary literacy someplace, and a man came up to me at the end, and he'd been teaching 20-some years in the district that he was in, and he says, you cannot imagine over my career how many initiatives and workshops and stuff we've had on content area reading. And he says, I've always attended, I've always participated politely and, you know, joined in, but then I've always come back to my classroom and closed the door and done exactly what I've been doing, teaching my subject matter. And he says, this is actually the first time I've actually understood why we need to do this stuff, why it actually makes sense. You know, where were you 20 years ago when you could have helped me? The notion of trying to make kids better students, teaching them some of the kinds of strategies that the National Reading Panel championed, teaching them some of the kinds of study skills or learning skills, nothing wrong with that. It's just, frankly, I'd like to see a lot of that accomplished fairly early on. That shouldn't be stuff that you guys are playing with a whole lot. Not saying zero, but that certainly shouldn't be the focus. If you look at the textbooks on content area reading since about the 1940s when we first had such things, textbooks for teachers, for your education, they're pretty similar. The methodologies, the teaching techniques that they recommend change a bit over the years, but the style that they adopt is pretty consistent. So for example, if you go back to the 1940s, those early textbooks, the first chapters are wonderful. The very first chapter will tell you how different reading and text is in math and science and social studies and literature and occasionally even some of the other kinds of specializations. And that's kind of cool. They recognize those differences. And then the rest of the books, all, you know, chapters 2 to whatever, are always, and therefore, since they're all so different, we have one technique that you can apply to everything. And so in the 1940s, it was something called SQ3R. Oh, there's some people who remember that one, right? What is that? Survey, question, read, recite, review. It's a good technique. It's a good study technique. Nothing wrong with that. But you can use it in science, you can use it in social studies, you can use it in literature, and so on. Isn't that cool? They're all so different, they're all so unique, and yet you can teach them to read using SQ3R. By the time I was becoming a teacher here in Michigan, what they were teaching was 3-level guides. Hal Herber's book was in the saddle. First chapter is tremendous. It's all about disciplinary literacy and how unique each of the specializations are and how different they are. And then you can teach all the subjects using SQ3, using 3-level guides, which essentially meant you would ask, you'd have the kids read the text and you'd ask them literal questions, you'd ask them inferential questions, and you'd ask them applications questions. And you could do that whether it was a geometry class or a biology class, didn't make any difference. By the time I was becoming a teacher, it was KWL. All these subjects are very different, but you can all do KWL. Science teachers, where are science teachers in the room? Oh, they made y'all sit together. They segregated you, that's fine. I understand that. I've long believed KWL is used in science classes a modal number of times 1. That, people come in and they have subjects that kids know nothing about, right? You know, we're going to talk about chemical bonding today. You know, what do you know about chemical bonding? Nothing. What do you want to know? I never asked that of a 14 or 15-year-old kid. What do you want to know about chemical bonding? And so teachers don't use it. But the fact is, it's recommended in all those different places. The disciplines are unique, but we're going to have you use your textbooks to teach reading. That's not what today is about, guys. That's not what we're going to be doing. This stuff has a place. There are some benefits they have figured out. They've got a lot of research showing that some of their techniques actually can be beneficial to kids. And I certainly wouldn't argue against using some of these techniques, certainly if it's appropriate to the situation. But we've got a different agenda today, and that's the disciplinary literacy one. Disciplinary literacy is a much newer concept. It's a much different concept. It comes from a very different place. This one is not about bringing ELA standards or methods or instructional approaches to the subject area classroom. It has nothing to do with that at all. It is a recognition that each discipline has its own ways of using text to create information, to disseminate that information, and to evaluate it. Because each field of study has different purposes and different intellectual methodologies that they use to create knowledge, they create very different kinds of texts, and they read and write those texts for very different purposes and in very different ways. And it's those things that we're talking about sharing with kids today. They're things that actually emanate from the disciplines, not things that the reading experts have said, oh, this would be a cool way to teach reading comprehension. That's not what this is about. The goal, basically, is to apprentice these boys and girls into your disciplines. One of the things that is really notable in the sciences, but and in social studies as well, we're seeing it in a number of fields, that more and more, especially at high school level, folks want to teach kids not just the content, but how do the experts in their field think or approach the subject, right? How does a scientist think? How do they approach problems? Not a crazy idea. How does a historian think about issues? How do they approach it? And we want our kids to know about that kind of stuff. This really fits in that category. How do they read? How do they write? What kinds of things are they trying to do? Why is a well-written sentence in science not a well-written sentence in your English class? That kind of thing, right? It's different. And so the emphasis here is not going to be on what's the same in all your situations. It's going to be what's different, what's unique, what's special. What are the things about reading and writing the kids need to know if they're going to do well in college, for instance, that the English teacher wouldn't know anything, or the reading teacher wouldn't know anything about teaching? Because those are the things that we have to make sure we're getting to our boys and girls. Now, I've got to tell you, I came to this notion from reading other people's work and frankly, from working with teachers like you. Because when I would go in and try to do the content area stuff, I would get the same pushback that every other reading professor got. And tried to be successful. And as I talked to the teachers and sort of heard their stories and figured out, I sort of came to this notion of disciplinary literacy as a way where I could get teachers on board, that they would go along with it because it made sense to them. It actually came out of their group rather than my group. My wife came to this in a very different way and much earlier. And like I say, I think her story is better. So I'm going to steal her story. It's not mine, but I'm championing her. And we've done any work I've done in this field on disciplinary literacy. I've always done it with Cindy because, as I say, she's been doing this pretty much longer than anybody in the field of reading. Cindy is a reading teacher. She has a PhD. She was university-based. Typically what that means in every state, including Michigan, is that the person, that's a reading professor at the University of Michigan or Oakland University or wherever, is going to be somebody who does research on reading and prepares teachers. You know, we'll stand in rooms like this and say, here's how you could handle your classroom. Cindy has a very different MO. In fact, she's about the only one I can think of in the field who has this. Because what she did at the university was not prepare teachers. She actually taught those underprepared college freshmen reading. So she was actually a reading teacher the whole time she was doing her research. And I'm, you know, oh yeah, so she did that for a year or two? She did that for 25 years. So she worked with those prepared college freshmen, or as they refer to them at the University of Georgia, the football team. She hates when I say that, because she worked with basketball players too. No, they actually do work with a wider group of students, but she did work with some of the most famous athletes of the last generation. It is absolutely true. And when I say she taught them, it wasn't like she got in a room like this. Yeah, she did some of this too. But she would literally take the courses with the students. She would go and sit in the lectures to see what the note-taking demands were. She would take the tests to see what the kids were required to do and know. She would participate in all that stuff so that she could teach them the right things. Very early on, not at the beginning, but very early on, she started to figure out that these students could read and write. They didn't have a phonics problem. This wasn't, oh, we're going to refer them to special education kind of thing. This was simply, these kids could read and write, but they couldn't read and write in any sophisticated way. They would take, say, American History 101, and they would read the material as, you know, factual material, and couldn't really participate in the class in the way the professors thought they should. And so essentially the professor would say, well, they can't read, which is, they can't read like a historian is true, but they can read. They can read the words and stuff like that. Same problems you guys are confronting in a lot of situations. And so very quickly, she started figuring out what she needed to teach. Wasn't a bunch of basic skills, and let's get some workbooks for these kids and stuff like that. It was, we have to teach, start letting them in on how the science professors are going to approach the text, how the literature professors are going to approach the text, and started doing her research on that. And she was doing that almost 30 years ago. So, I mean, that's, if we're really serious about trying to help our boys and girls to succeed, this is really a key element of it. Now, just think about this for a minute. You guys are a successful school district, so that I'm going to use like state averages or national averages, and you guys outperform this a bit. I don't quite know how much, but you're higher than this. So if they're a good statistic, your numbers should be a little bit better than the ones I'm using. If they're a bad number, they should be a little lower than what I'm giving you. But the fact is, the numbers aren't good. Here's what I'm talking about. In the state of Michigan, slightly over 70% of boys and girls graduate from high school meeting state standards in the various. Pretty cool, huh? And you guys are a bit higher than that, I get it. About 72% of those kids start college. It's kind of nice. A little over 50% of those kids that start college need remedial instruction in freshman year in reading or writing or math, or sometimes 2 or 3 of those. Those are the kids we're succeeding with. I'm not talking about the kids at the bottom who you go, oh man, you know, I don't know what he's going to do, or this kid is going to just try to go out and work and repair air conditioners and stuff and hope we can make it, that kind of thing. But no, these are the kids we're succeeding with, and I'm telling you, more than half, in fact, nationally, it's like 56% of the kids are requiring remedial instruction once they get to college. And of course, those kids who go out into the workplace, the ones whose intention is to try to support themselves without getting higher education, those students, if you look at the surveys of their employers, something like the numbers that keep coming back are between 70 and 80% of the students either don't have the reading skills to be able to do the job or don't have the reading skills to be able to take the training to do the job. That's not so good. And the kids who decide to go military, which isn't uncommon, you want to pay for your college education, kids go that way, that's terrific. In that pot, what I can tell you is about 2 years ago, the Department of Defense yet again lowered the educational standard for those folks so that they'd be able to hit their recruitment numbers. But there are implications to doing that. See, they can, it's unlike the employer who's going, man, I got to get somebody in here who can do this job. I can't hire anybody else. The military can say, look, we'll bring people in, we'll train them up. But the cost of training a recruit where you can't use as much literacy increases the cost of that training, so your taxes go up. And more importantly, I think, their survival rate in the field goes down. It's a life and death issue for some of these kids. It's not just, oh, he doesn't read as well as we'd like him to. It's, I want him to stay alive, guys. I want him to stay alive. So this idea that we're being successful, that we're better than average school district is good, and you're to be honored for that. But the fact of the matter is we have too many of these boys and girls, even the ones we're succeeding with, supposedly, who are failing when they leave. When they leave, I think the other microphone. It just died on me, or that was maybe my hurt gave out. We'll see what happens. Is my voice big enough for the back of the room? Yeah. Okay, I'll try this for a few moments. I'll keep going then. Our boys and girls need to be working in text, and I'm not going to say, oh, well, that's not helping me at all. I think this is a battery issue. You have batteries in that little. Our boys and girls too often are in situations where the teachers look at their class and say, some of these kids are going to struggle with the text. Some of these kids are going to have trouble reading. And therefore, I'm going to solve the problem by not using text in the classroom. That's not helping, because that gets you, you get your information out, and that's good, but you're not getting it out in the way that these boys and girls need you to. And think about it. If you take 9th grade biology, and the teacher says that textbook's too hard for the kids, so I can tell them everything they need to know, you're going to end up thinking so much. It's so much easier on the voice. It's so much better for the boys and girls to not just get the information, but to actually have the ability to get it themselves. And so if you spend a year in biology not having the kids work with the text, that's terrific. But when they hit chemistry in 10th grade, do you think there are more kids who can handle the science language or fewer? And then, gee, if the 10th grade chemistry teacher plays that same game, and so on as the kids go through school, what we see is kids from terrific high schools around the country get to college and they get into these incredible, terrific departments like in engineering and such, and find that frankly they're being assigned to remedial reading because they haven't seen a science book in 4 years. That's not acceptable. So we have to figure out how to deal with that. My emphasis today is going to be very much on what's different about these disciplines, what makes them unique or special, so that we can actually tailor what we do to what we're really trying to accomplish here. Where does this stuff come from? If I were talking about content area reading, I could tell you quite simply, the research that we would be sharing, the research we'd be talking about would come from people like me. They come from reading educators. I have a terrific way that you could teach reading in your math class. Is that from a math teacher? No, that's from a reading teacher. I know about reading. I've decided this would be really terrific for you guys to do in your math class. I think that might be part of the problem. It's not that these methods aren't good or don't work. It's just because they come from people like me, why in the heck would you listen? Why would you want them? What you're going to see is a good deal of it, some of it's coming from people like me. I've done a little of this, but the fact is, a good deal of this research that I'm going to be sharing and talking about actually comes from those fields of study. It's the historians who are looking at how do historians read. It's the scientists who are looking at how do scientists read. It isn't people like Tim Shanahan. We do a little bit of that work, but it's coming from all these different fields of study. So I'm not here to share with you what my club thinks you guys should all do in your clubs. I'm here to actually tell you about what some of the top people in your clubs are saying. It's a different mindset altogether. There are really two bodies of research that need to be drawn on here. There's starting to be a pedagogical one, and that's moving along, but a good deal of the research has been really about identifying really what would the curriculum be. What is it that people do that's different with literacy? One body of research takes very much a cognitive sciences approach. It focuses typically on expert performance. In this case, expert readers or expert writers. Most of the studies in this slot look at experts and compare the experts with novices. And so, for example, if it's literature, they might have a group of poets who will read some text, they read through text, and then they do what's called a think aloud. As they may read some amount of text, and they stop, and they start telling you what they're thinking, what they were doing in their head, what the text was making them do. And there are studies like this in a number of fields, in physics, in chemistry, in mathematics, law, in history, various ones in literature, and so on. I'd love to say every field is covered, not yet. And we need more even in the fields where I say that there are some of these studies. But they compare. Now, when we did our expert reader studies, we looked at chemists, and we looked at mathematicians, and we looked at historians. The studies that Cindy and I did. And Cindy was adamant that there's a problem if you take, let's say we take a historian and we compare him with a high school student. That there might be other reasons why the historian reads differently than the high school student that have nothing to do with the fact that he's a historian. Yeah, they're more accomplished, they're more mature, so on and so forth. Different stage of life. So what we did is we compared the experts. We compared the mathematicians and the chemists and the historians with each other, but all kind of variations on the theme. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. Let me talk about the other body of research. This comes out of a field that's referred to as functional linguistics. The functional linguists, and they started out mainly looking at science texts, but that has evolved. The functional linguists analyzed not the readers, they analyze the text themselves. And so they will take science text, for example, and initially botany text, and they will analyze the language. They use, they're linguists. They use the language analysis tools that they have. And what they try to figure out is what's specialized or unique. What are these people doing that's different with language that everybody else does? And then they try to infer back, what would lead somebody to do that? Why would they use language in such a unique or different way? Nobody is surprised. Nobody is surprised. I talked to kindergarten teachers yesterday, and they weren't surprised. Nobody is surprised that a science text and a history text and a literature text are going to use different vocabulary. That's kind of a no-brainer, right? We all know that. But what shocks people, are you aware that they use different grammar? That they construct sentences differently? That a sentence that an English teacher might say is a well-written sentence is not the sentence that the historian or especially the scientist would go for? Because we need to talk about some of those things because our boys and girls don't know how to read those kinds of text. And nobody's showing them. And so these folks look at the text and infer back. Now, I don't do work in the functional linguistics area, haven't contributed to that literature, but they've come up with some cool tools that I think would be good in some of your classes. So I'm going to share some of their stuff today as well, not just ours, if that makes sense to you. I said I'd give you an example of an expert reader study. I think this might be the most widely cited one or best known one, so I'll use it. This is work done by Sam Weinberg. Sam Weinberg is not a reading educator. In fact, when Sam has questions about reading, he often sends me an email and says, hey, Tim, what about? Sam is a historian and a history educator at Stanford University. Social studies folks in the room probably know who he is, when the rest of you might be going, I've never heard of the guy, that kind of thing. Sam did a study, a whole series of studies, but the first study he did was on this was one of these think aloud studies where he took a group of historians and a group of high school students, and he had them reading history texts. And then you analyze these think alouds and you compare them, you try to see what's different. And Sam found that there were just profound differences between how the high school kids read these texts and how the historians read them. And it's really evolved into, in fact, typical middle school and high school history materials now often have units built right in. You don't have to believe me, it's right in your own stuff. And it's put there by Sam and his colleagues and students and so on. But they found 3 particular processes or strategies that the historians engaged in, and they didn't see at all from the kids. One of those was what Sam referred to as sourcing. It's a widely used term now around that, but essentially the historians talked a lot about not the text, but the authors. Why is the person telling me this? Who is this person? When did they say this? When were they writing this? Who was this written for? All that kind of authorial, where did this come from? Now, in 1991, Sam thought this was a technique or a strategy that historians use. By a few years ago, he concluded after these decades of study, it's not a strategy, it's a way of life, it's a point of view. He actually believes this is the single most important thing that kids learn in social studies, that you have to consider the source of material because other subject areas don't pay that much attention to it. The historians pay attention to it all the time. In our study, the historians, it felt like every third word out of their mouth was author. The author wants me to believe this. The reason the author's telling me that. This author wants. Very, very interesting kind of experience. Very different experience than what we got with the scientists and the mathematicians, by the way. We'll get into that. So this notion of sourcing. Students, do they worry about who wrote this or where it came from? Or not at all. Not at all. Doesn't even come up. A second one, contextualizing. In contextualizing, the historian tries to place the document in its historical context, in its period, in its place, trying to interpret it appropriately, trying to avoid fallacies. And 2 big fallacies that they work hard to avoid, they tell me, are presentism and pastism. Where are the social studies teachers in the room? Oh, there you go. A bunch of you right across there. You guys know what I'm talking about. Everybody else might not. Presentism and pastism. Presentism is the view that some folks have that history is this line of progress that you go from, everybody in the past was kind of stupid and dopey and didn't know what they were doing, but we've gotten smarter and smarter, and we are the apex of civilization. This is, we're on the mountaintop here, guys. Yeah, oh yeah, feels like it, doesn't it? Pastism is obviously the opposite of that. That's that we're going to make America great again. It's that kind of thing. It used to all be wonderful, but it's all gone to hell in a handbasket, and the world is horrible now, and we're all really stupid, and if we could be like they were 100 years ago, everything would be wonderful. And historians look at both of those and go, you got to actually look at the events going on, what was going on then. You can't do that kind of thing. So they try to contextualize it. The example I like to use is quite often in these studies, they use some of like Abraham Lincoln's writings. It will be part of the text that people are reading. And you can read some Abraham Lincoln writing, like from 1858, he gives this speech when he's running for the Senate, right? He's running against slavery. He's trying to get white people to vote against slavery. And he says terrible things about African Americans. He says that they are not equal to us as human beings, morally or intellectually. And people look at that now and go, he's a racist. This is a horrible guy. The historian looks at that and says, what was he trying to accomplish there? He was trying to convince white people who didn't want to give up this slavery thing, even if they weren't in a slavery state, because they were scared to death that these blacks were going to run the show and be in charge, and we'd have to marry them and all that kind of crap. And essentially, he's trying to persuade them, no, look, guys, if you free the slaves, and we should free the slaves, it's morally right to free the slaves, they don't measure up to you. You don't have to worry about them. It's not going to be the problem you think it is. And so the historian is, you got to put it in the context of the time of what he was doing and who he was talking to. You can't just look at the words and say, see, he's a racist. It's not that simple. It's more complicated. And corroboration. Corroboration, the historians evaluate information across texts. Now, this one shouldn't surprise us. Let me just give a little contrast. Scientists. How do scientists contribute to our knowledge? What do they do? We were all reading a lot about this, hearing a lot about this on the news with the vaccines and the treatments and the masks and all kinds of stuff. What are the things that scientists do to create knowledge? And they do two things. They do systematic observations, and they do some form of an experiment, right? They try things out in various controlled ways. Now let's think about what the historian does, since we're talking about history reading here right now. Historians, let's say a historian has decided that he wants to do a study about the effects of the Great Depression on women's lives in this part of Michigan. Could he go and do careful observation? Can't do it, right? He missed it by 90 years. Oops. Can he go and do an experiment that'll answer his question? It's a different way of creating knowledge. It's a different kind of knowledge that they're trying to create. They're going to try to tell a plausible story, and they're going to build that plausible story by looking at multiple perspectives. Gee, I found a diary that a housewife in Lapeer, Michigan kept in 1932. I found letters that a mother and her son had exchanged when he was in the CCC. There was some newspaper article. I'm going to find all these different pieces of information, and I'm going to try to come up with a plausible description of what that all means. Historians are constantly looking at information across different information sources, trying to corroborate, and that has implications for how they read. The historians are doing all these things. What are the kids doing? Well, first of all, their starting point is so different from the historians. The historians start out to say, these historical documents are an argument. They're not facts, they're arguments. And my job is to join the argument. It's a very dynamic kind of a reading process. The kids say, this is factual material, this is truth. This is the stuff that happened before, and they want us to know it for some dumb reason. And it's boring. And what my job is to remember it. I just got to get it in my head. Not very dynamic. They don't think about it very critically. They don't get what it is. I mean, many years ago, I was teaching here in Michigan. I was teaching some lessons in middle school. And the task that we gave the kids is we were in the library with tables just like this, actually. And we had a class of 7th graders and a class of 8th graders, and they were gathered around the tables, mixed up, so there were 7th and 8th graders at each table. We had on each table a stack of history textbooks. We had the one that the school had adopted and was using. There were textbooks from the adoption process that they had left over that we used. Teachers pulled them out of their own personal collection. So everybody had 4 or 5 textbooks. And we gave everybody a recording form and a pencil. We gave one person on the team a recording form and a pencil. And we just had some real simple questions that we wanted them to answer. One of the questions I remember was, what year did the Vietnam War start? And the way it usually worked is they pick a girl in the group to be the secretary or be the, you know, the lead person. So you're gonna write down what we found. And we all take a book and we all go looking for the answer to when did the Vietnam War start. And what would usually happen, and happened a number of times with these kids, is one of the kids would say, oh, I found it, here it is, it says 1954. And the girl would write it down. And by the time she got it written down, one of the other kids in the group would be saying, hey, wait a minute, my book says it was 1964. And then somebody would look in the third book and they'd say, well, this says it was in the 19th century. And so the kids came up with two strategies to solve the problem, because they really understand history. One was you have to ask the oldest person in the room, because they probably know what happened. They were alive then. And I was the oldest person in the room, so they'd ask me, you know, what year did it start? Not understanding that it's a political or ideological issue. Or the real solution in those days was you turn to the World Book. The World Book knows everything. Now it's Google. Yeah. So it's really changed. It hasn't changed at all. It's just now we use technology to be ignorant. The fact is, in history, when a war began, or what we call something, is an argument. And unless you understand that it's an argument and not a set of facts, you can't approach it properly. So of course the historians read differently than the kids, but that's revealing of what we need to teach. And as I say, there's studies like that in any number of fields. Let's talk about this just briefly. I hope you can see it in the back. This down here says basic literacy, here it says intermediate literacy, and here it says disciplinary literacy. That black on blue isn't working so well under these lights. Basic literacy, this picture is really meant, this illustration is really meant to be a visual metaphor for sort of kids' development in reading and what the curriculum needs to look like. This basic literacy piece of it, as you see, takes up almost the entire slide in that row. There's very little white space, it's almost all blue. And what that's meant to symbolize or represent is the idea that the things that we teach in basic literacy, those things that we, frankly, I'd love it if I could tell you, every kid in this town would have them accomplished by third grade. Everyone would know basic literacy by third, you know, but they don't, I understand. But we'd love it if they all did. But these are highly generalizable skills and abilities and knowledge. Decoding, how to sound out words, phonics, that kind of stuff, clearly is basic literacy. You guys shouldn't, unless there's some special education teachers in the room, you guys shouldn't be dealing with that at all, right? That's a basic literacy thing. That has to be accomplished before kids get to middle school. And if it isn't, that becomes a special education issue, not a regular general education issue. Knowing the letters, knowing high-frequency words like the and of and is. You guys have to be able to depend on the idea that kids are going to walk in knowing that kind of stuff. In reading comprehension, there's some really basic things that you don't deal with or shouldn't be dealing with. For example, when I used to teach first grade, you could have kids read a text and they might say something to you like, you might ask them a question like, how did the boy in the story feel? And the kids would say, well, you can't know, it doesn't tell. Not understanding that you're allowed to draw inferences, right? I mean, that seems like you're breaking the rules, and they don't want to break the rules. They're good kids. Whoever your worst reading seventh grader is, they know you're supposed to inference, right? Or I remember once with my oldest daughter, she asked me to read with her one night, and she was maybe 6, and I had to take care of some things. I said, you read on your own for a little bit, and I'll come to you when I can. And when I did show up, I said, so how are you doing? She said, great, I'm on page 32. I said, what's it about? She said, I don't know. She'd just been reading the words. She was enjoying the luxury of doing all the decoding and stuff, but she didn't get that she's required to pay attention to the meaning. And again, your kids might be having trouble understanding, but they get that when they read something, they're supposed to understand that. Those are basic things. Text features, something like punctuation. And basic literacy would probably include things like periods and question marks, those kinds of things. And again, what I mean by basic isn't just early, it's highly generalizable. Because everything I used as an example there, every one of those comes up in virtually every reading situation any of us is ever in. It doesn't matter whether we're reading a stop sign or a medical text or a newspaper, you're gonna need all the stuff I was talking about. Let's move it out to intermediate literacy. And the key here is, gee, the pyramid got narrower. The generalizability is going down. We're gonna still want our kids in those upper elementary grades and maybe into middle school possibly to learn some things about literacy that are gonna be highly useful, that you'll use in many, many, many situations, but not in all. It's gonna narrow down. And so you're still gonna be learning things about comprehension, but maybe those things will be, a lot of general reading strategies. Those things that can work no matter what you're reading. Gee, when I'm reading the text, it helps if I stop every so often and summarize what the text is telling me. Or if I'm reading, I find if I ask myself questions about it, see if I can answer them without looking back, that then I understand it. If I don't, then I go back and I can look. And you can do those kinds of things with any text. Or I monitor my comprehension when I'm reading. Even adults, the studies show something like 11% of the time when we're reading, we're unconscious. You know what I'm talking about. You're reading along and you find yourself on page 24 and you don't know how you got there. What do you do when that happens? Okay, you go back and then, okay, I get it. You know what a typical sixth grader does? Goes, great, I'm on page 24. It just keeps going. And so learning some things like, no, that's not how you do it. It's some fix-up strategies, that kind of thing. You're still learning punctuation, but it's probably colons and semicolons and stuff like that. You're learning vocabulary, but it's those words that what Isabel Beck refers to as tier 2 words, those words that we don't hear much in oral language, but we see them a lot in print, that don't belong to any subject matter. So we're not going to teach rhombus as part of this, but we might teach a word like reluctant or principle or those kinds of words. But look it up here. This little tip of the pyramid, look at how narrow it is. And it's so narrow because the things that we're talking about today are not highly generalizable. We're not talking about, can I get you folks to teach kids some general reading properties that they can use all the time? No. If you're teaching a social studies class, I'm hoping you can teach kids how to read history. If you're teaching a science class, I'm hoping you can teach kids to read science. Now, I recognize that I'm not that in this room, there are people who teach outside of those 4 disciplines, right? There are people who teach other specializations. And perhaps some of those have been studied, but most of them haven't. And so what do I have to say to you? And what I'm going to tell you is I think the best advice right now is to think about what it is that you teach and how it matches up with these disciplines. So for example, do we have any music teachers in the room? Hi guys, welcome. Glad you're here. Music people are sitting there going, he's talking about history, he's talking about science, he doesn't know about music people, why is he leaving us out? This is a tricky one. When I was in charge of reading for the Chicago Public Schools, where I was responsible for 437,000 boys and girls and 26,000 teachers, the music teachers often were saying, we want to play, we want to be part of this, we want to help, we want to help raise reading achievement, what can we do? And I both want to keep guys like that, these folks back here, at arm's length, and I want to embrace them, though we're not allowed to embrace them right now. What I'm really trying to say is this. If in their class, at this point in time, the kids are supposed to be doing choral singing or playing some kind of an instrument or something. I would not want them to cut a minute of that out for reading time. That's silly. If you're supposed to be teaching kids how to sing in a certain way and they need to be singing, they ought to be teaching that. They shouldn't be saying, well, we want to contribute to literacy, so maybe if our kids sang less, that's not going to help. That's not what I'm asking for. But the fact of the matter is, and I don't know your music curriculum, I'm just using music as an example, because I could have done this with physical education, I could have done this with the arts and so on, business and those kinds of things. But essentially what I would say is, I don't know your curriculum, and I know it'll vary with different classes. But sometimes the music curriculum is very much a humanities curriculum. It's very much we study where these songs are from, or when the orchestra started doing this and that. And that's terrific, but that's very much a history kind of thing. And I'd say, hey, guess what? Some of the history things we're going to talk about today make some sense in the context that you're teaching. There are other places, no, our music, we get into acoustics and things like that. It's very scientific. And guess what? That would suggest that the kinds of texts you'd be asking kids to read would fall more on that side of the house, and therefore paying attention to, well, how do those science people read? So my point isn't how do I get you guys to twist your curricula out of shape to somehow meet my reading ideals. It's where does the things I'm telling about reading fit in your curriculum? That's the point. It's what I'm giving has to fit into what you're doing, not the other way around. Does that make sense to folks? You see where I'm coming from? And I think as we do this, you'll see that I'm not just doing that to try to be a good guy. I'm doing that because it's the only thing that makes sense here if you're really trying to accomplish the goals we have for these boys and girls. It's practical. It's appropriate to what we're doing. I'm going to go a slide or two further. I will give you a break. You haven't been going with me very long, but you were sitting a long time before you were with me, and so I'm going to give you a brief break and we will come back to it. But essentially, this just sums up what I've been saying. Content reading is based on the idea of reading and writing being highly generalizable skills. This idea that if you can read anything. And what that means is they teach a bunch of approaches that, at least theoretically, can be used in all fields. Disciplinary literacy focuses not on what's the same in the disciplines, but what's unique or specialized. What's going to be missed if you don't step up to the plate and make sure it gets addressed? What is it that is going to cheat these kids out of what they need? I live in a city with a lot of gangs and drugs and stuff like that. And I got to tell you, the gangbangers and the drug peddlers and stuff, they're after our kids in Chicago. They try to recruit them. They try to get them in. I actually think we all ought to be trying to do that with our boys and girls. I'd love the math department to be saying, you're really good with numbers, and you seem to like precision. You should join our club. Each of you should be trying to get your kids to come along with the direction that you're going. And to do that, we're going to have to start telling some of our cognitive secrets. We're going to have to start telling them what we're doing and why we're doing it. Content area reading tends to focus on a toolbox of strategies. Disciplinary literacy strategies have to emerge from the nature of the content and the epistemology of the field. I certainly don't have all the answers. I can give you a number I'll give you a number of techniques and a number of insights. But frankly, one of the things, if we were doing more of a workshop-y thing today and not just at a distance presentation, one of the things I'd be asking all of you is, if you actually studied to be the kind of teacher you are, to go into the content that you're focused on, I would suggest one of the things to ask yourself is, was it ever hard for you? What made it hard? When was it hard? How did you get through whatever was hard for you? I'll give you one example of that. I was talking to a high school teacher who taught literature, and she said, from the time I was a kid, I always loved stories and plays and stuff like that. When I got to middle school and high school, the teachers were always telling me I should be an English teacher. And I really loved it. And then I got into college and it was going great until I think it was her junior year. She took a class in the Russian novel. and wanted to die. It was kind of, gee, this is not, this isn't what I thought it was gonna be. This is a lot harder than I expected. Stories had always been easy for her. They'd always just come to her. She loved it. And I said, well, how did you get through that? She said, well, one of the things I figured out is one of the things that was blocking me is in a Russian novel, every character has like 10 names. It's, it's Count Vronsky, but he's also called, Ilya, and he's got this, his wife calls him. And I found that I made a bookmark, and I would write down all the variations on this person's name, and sometimes I'd put in parentheses, if there was only one person calling them, that who it was, so that I could keep track of what was going on. And I said, that's a terrific technique. I've not seen that anyplace. Did you teach that in your class? And she said, no. But see, that's the kind of thing. You have to turn to what you know about your discipline and what's hard about it. So instead of me kind of leading you through discussions like that today, I'm going to give you these kinds of insights, but I hope you'll do that kind of thinking. I hope you and your colleagues will engage in some of that. And let me just, okay, I'm going to stop right there. 10 minutes, and we'll see you back here, folks. Thank you.
I don't even know why you called me. You don't wear a black. I don't. I still have it. I was wondering if it would come. I can sue. But German sealed it better. So it's not showing out. Right. They got that. Every day. Just create some space. I wear it all day yesterday. Yeah, no worries about it. I know that too. Dang it! That's not so I go home and feel all my messages. It's like, oh, right, yeah.
I like this. Yeah, she's going to the actual service.
How many did you get?
I tried to swing by her. I like your mask. It looks really light.
Oh, okay.
It's not. It's yours. Yeah. Did you make it? No, I bought it. I bought it on Amazon.
I think it might be able to see it out.
It's supposed to be ones I have watched. The one that's the straw hole. That haven't come in yet. Yeah, they have a little straw hole.
Oh, clever.
I know.
Yeah, like I don't want to send like. I don't want to shoot you. I don't want to send your text like where they make any No. Like the girls' jeans dirty box, dirty guidelines. So it's like, we just like, that's one of the things that just hurt really fast. Like there's lots of stuff like we just don't know putting it in. But I did know some stuff too. Yeah, no, yeah. Don't stop anything, whatever. Outside, there's not a whole lot to like next week. It's just figure out what you need. Next week's the time. Like the dresses, we just don't have enough room there. The shoes go to town. That's right. But also remember, we have the people here in the lake. No, go to town because I'm not going to be spending as much time. Yeah. So she's got the 6. Yeah, but any major thing, this is 6 months. She said it recently. But for next week. Yeah. The IEPs. And then catering. All day. And you don't have time to plan for like your school. You do have an additional responsibility you have to have. Yeah. I get it. I can work at